Kalorama, a Recorded Books Highbridge imprint, presents The National Road, Dispatches from a Changing America, by Tom Zoellner. Read by Rick Adamson. Tell me the landscape in which you live, and I will tell you who you are. Jose Ortega y Gasset. Your Land. A summer afternoon in Kansas, shadows in the grass, and a diagonal slash cut into the earth. The trench in the soil had nailed me in place, as if I had just been shown the ribs of a dinosaur skeleton. Nothing here but a rut in the ground, but what a remarkable rut, because it had been carved here by hundreds of wagons traveling on the Santa Fe Trail in the mid-19th century, jangling with goods headed southwest, crossing through territory of the Pawnee and Kiowa. The ground still wore a scar of their passage. I could not have been more mesmerized looking at a full-color telescope blast of the Crab Nebula, or at the dark shroud of the Virgin of Guadalupe. An eccentric idea took root that afternoon at the side of this Kansas highway, though it would take a few more years to fully materialize. When I grew restless with a newspaper job and looked for an excuse to get away, I remembered that slash in the ground from the Santa Fe Trail. Could I follow its path on foot? Missouri to New Mexico, 900 miles chasing the ghosts of wagons. A few months later, I had 40 pounds of gear on my back on a dirt road on a ridge near Little Wakarusa Creek on the path of the old wagon trail. Green stubbles of wheat poked upward from nearby fields. Farther away, I could see horses grazing in a pasture, nickering to one another. And as the ridge rose farther, it came to one of those crests so common in eastern Kansas that opens a broad vista of prairie that has the illusion of limitlessness. A cloud bank shredded the afternoon sun into lace, pouring light down on all the miles flowing westward, promising something unseen over the edge, a Denver, a Santa Fe, a Pacific Ocean. Land wedded to a democratic ideal. How was it possible, I wondered, that all of this American land, in every direction, could be fastened together into a whole? How could all those unseen cities, all those drab little towns, all those races and languages, all those hundreds of millions of flawed human beings with vastly different stories and troubles be kept hanging together in a consensus that centered around nothing more than a 4-page rule book and a set of disputed principles that we argued about before the Santa Fe Trail was there and long after it disappeared? What are the enduring features that make us Americans? Those questions grew sharper for me as I saw more of the country, and they again take on a special urgency. America began as a search for community, wrote Librarian of Congress Daniel Borston about the settlements of religious zealots, adventurers, cotton growers, wastrels, and second-chance merchants trying to stay alive on the frigid coast of New England wilderness. And yet, in that search for order, came an idea of self-government based on the Enlightenment values of John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and John Adams's observation that the real purpose of government was to bring the greatest quantity of human happiness. To live as an American was supposedly to be under a system designed to maximize the rewards of simply being alive, the love of hard work, the just compensation for invention and risk, the liberty to love and marry at will, the introspection about religion, the safety from leaders who bully and steal. One common trope when describing America is to emphasize motion. The climb out of poverty, the race to the top, the mad desire to see what's over the mountain. Migration is our franchise. New Englanders moved out to the richer farmlands of the upper Midwest in the 1830s. Their great-grandchildren lit out to California a century later. Mormons took their wagons across 1,000 barren miles to escape religious persecution. African Americans left the sweltering fields of the prejudiced South for the higher wages of the gray cities of the North, like Chicago, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. The practice of moving for college or moving for a job is so ingrained that it has become a standard practice. But today, our country is slowing down and staying in place, an effect that COVID-19 only accelerated. Approximately 1 out of every 5 Americans changed their address in 1950, but that figure is now less than 1 in 9. Fewer people are moving today than in any year out of the last half-century. A country on the move seems to be more reluctant than ever to pick up and go, even when prospects are grim, not just in small-town America, but in once powerful mid-tier cities like St. Louis, Denver, and Memphis. In 1968, the author of the small-town requiem, The Last Picture Show, wrote of the brain drain in rural Texas. The kids who stayed in the country tended to be dull, lazy, cautious, or all three. Those with brains, zip, and daring were soon off to Dallas or Houston, wrote Larry McMurtry. This is less true today than ever before. The American concept of geography has undergone a powerful shift. Place is less important than it has ever been to those who can free themselves from it, yet more important to those who aren't able to leave it. The economically privileged can live where they please in the ethereal non-space of the information sphere. St. Augustine speculated that God was a circle where the center was nowhere, and the circumference was everywhere. He might as well have been describing the Internet. In his seminal 2002 book, The Rise of the Creative Class, the sociologist Richard Florida laid out a vision of winner cities like Portland, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Austin, and Missoula that offered charms to lure the soldiers of the laptop army who would set their own schedules and dream transformative dreams for the rest of us. Where once people had to go to a particular place, a telephone box, a computer to communicate, now communications come to them in the form of a pager, a mobile telephone, or a laptop with a phone jack, wrote The Economist in 1997 in the midst of the detachment revolution. But not for most people. The shift in manufacturing capacity to Asia and the rise of corporate farming has made shells out of healthy towns like Gloversville, New York, Concordia, Kansas, and Cairo, Illinois. Those without the means or desire to move out are caught in a web of diminishing opportunities. The championship cities of urban America and its information-based trades have economies growing more entangled with London, Sao Paulo, and Beijing than with fading cities like St. Louis, Cleveland, or Bakersfield. The new zones of exclusion have shut out Americans from their own country through ways that are both literal and perceived. Winter cities have become havens of inequality and nearly impossible to navigate for those drawing old-school paychecks from retail jobs or public schools. Tiny fragments of San Francisco today contain more gross national product and fluid capital than entire Midwestern cities. The liberal values of these places come under increasing suspicion by those on the geographic outside of them. Our recent simplified dialectic of coastal elites versus real Americans is actually more about location than values. Some places in America were set up from the beginning to be sacrificial zones, a repository of industrial overspill, shabby real estate, or neighborhoods redlined by racial discrimination. The New Jersey marshes on the west side of the Hudson River became a haven of unregulated dumping of garbage and chemicals that benefited only the shining city nearby. The town of Opportunity, Montana, was built around a giant smelter, belching arsenic and heavy metals from copper mined from nearby Butte. Native Americans were pushed into some of the least valuable lands in the West. Virtually every city founded by railroads created class distinctions based on the cleaving line of the tracks. What was once a regional practice is now happening on a national scale, as entire portions of the country, primarily rural and in politically conservative regions, are written off as lost. Residents of West Virginia used to complain that they were treated as an internal colony by the rest of the country, stripped for coal and left empty. Such can now be said of broader swaths of Appalachia, the Midwest, and the Mountain West, where joblessness and life expectancy are diverging in large proportions from those of the cities where the economic winners live. Resentment builds. National cohesiveness phrase. It is commonly said that America is the first country to be based on an idea rather than a shared ethnicity. Yet our nationhood is also heavily dependent on a shared place. Here is our lowest common denominator. We all stand on the same land. If you want to know Americans, look at where they live first. Look at the land. Geography is our bounty. It has also become a curse. American place is not what it once was, neither in shape nor optimism. Bank mergers have destroyed local institutions that took the long view of civic development and strategic lending. Changes in agricultural technology, an even chancier proposition than ever before, with its emphasis on mechanization and gigantic yields. Consolidation of wealth in fewer hands leaves fewer chances for rural entrepreneurship and innovation, which opens a vacancy in the national spirit. To be rooted is perhaps the most important and least recognized need of the human soul, wrote the French theologian Simone Weil. To live as an American citizen implies a form of ownership in the future of the country, a tiny garden patch of responsibility. But in today's uprooted America, your land means less than it ever did, but paradoxically much more. Geography is invariably personal. I grew up in a place that didn't seem particularly meaningful to me at the time, a squiggle of bland new homes pounded into virgin Sonoran desert to the north of Tucson, a blooming Sunbelt city whose pattern of promenade avenues was founded on the right-angled idea of urban planning first brought to the continent by William Penn in the 1680s when he laid out Philadelphia. It was only when I started to travel on my own through the United States that I began to understand the contradictions of space, why certain places are esteemed and why others are sacrificed, and how these places form individual character. Geography is destiny, goes the old historian's chestnut. We all carry maps of our country, however big or small, around in our minds, a web of association and memory, and understand ourselves through their reading. It is a physical kind of patriotism. At the heart of the American nostalgic subconscious lies the small town. We know this place, even if we never lived there. There's the business block, the classic Main Street U.S. of A., with adjoining retail emporiums made of masonry and darkened upper-story windows shaded with blinds. Perhaps there is a drugstore selling prescriptions and cough drops, a car dealership smelling of rubber, a cafe serving pizza and French fries, a theater hanging on with second-run movies, a cafe where a group of old men, flush with memories and obscure local wit, meet for coffee every Tuesday and linger there until 10 o'clock in the morning. Nearby is the spire of a First Church, often painted white with stained glass, and farther down, a railroad avenue lined with derelict warehouses with bottles scattered among the side weeds, and fronting shanty houses with sloping porches. In the more moneyed precincts is a park with poplar trees and a set of playground equipment ordered from a municipal catalog, maybe a swimming pool whose cement foundation was initially poured because of a subscription drive or bond issue before the First World War. The houses of the gentry, the doctor, the attorney, the newspaper editor, the banker, aren't far away, with their over-furnished parlors, mansard roofs, and backyard grills. At night, the street lamps cast patterns of oak leaves on the pavement, and mist crowns the grass in the hours before dawn. On the edge of town is the high school, a modernist slab with at least one wall painted in the primary colors of the school and bearing its mascot in a fighting crouch, and which keeps the town regularly supplied with minor legend, intrigue, sports lore, and alarm over the peccadilloes of the young. Out on the highway, you'll find a purposely zoned strip of monoculture, as leveling as any force in national society, a Rite Aid, a McDonald's, a Comfort Inn, a Dollar General where the wages are bad. The taste is salt, fat, sugar, and goods are the same from East Millinocket, Maine to Petaluma, California. American Place takes hold of us like a hand reaching up from the bedside, and creates a familiarity and intimacy that recalls the wonderful Welsh word hiraeth, an inexpressible longing for home, even when home as a physical place is a shifting concept. My own touchstones are scattered across the country. There is a particular staircase in the U.S. House of Representatives, for example, where I used to linger when I was part of the corps of interns that passed through the Capitol each year, a green laminated press credential hanging around my neck. I liked to stare at a mural painted above the staircase, a scene in the heroic style titled "Westward the Course of Empire Takes Its Way," depicting a movie-ready cast of mountain men, pioneer wives, and wagoners in beaver pelt caps struggling to mount a precipice that opened to a view of a Pacific harbor. Of course, the mural leaves out the indefensible treatment of Native Americans, the corruption of the railroads, the despair of the bankrupted, and the rest of the dismal realities of what used to be called manifest destiny. Yet the presence of this mythology within the seat of national power seemed fascinating to me in all of its Copeland-esque idealism and selective memory. So many more places that I once knew and keep wanting to see again. A knob of grassy land off the winding Kunzelman Road on the north side of the Golden Gate Bridge in Marin County, California, where I used to bring a bottle of cheap red wine. Old miners' shacks clinging to the hillsides in Welch, West Virginia. Iron ramps of the DuSable Bridge folded like praying hands over the pale blue Chicago River. The Hennepin Avenue Bridge to Nicollet Island from downtown Minneapolis, with a view of the sign for Grain Belt Beer. The weedy backyard of a friend's house in a working-class neighborhood of Cheyenne, Wyoming, just south of the Union Pacific Transcontinental Tracks. The roof of the Raleigh Hotel on Collins Avenue in Miami Beach, where I once watched a mammoth thunderstorm roll in from the Caribbean. The eastern approach to Denver, with the neon lights of the El Rancho restaurant up on a bluff and passing underneath a series of warning signs. Truckers, you are not down yet. Another 1.5 miles of steep grade and sharp curves to go. The oval town green of Lebanon, New Hampshire, whose particular New England arrangement of elms and stone buildings gives it an aura of stability and consequence, in the words of writer James Howard Kunstler, even though its fabric mills shut down decades ago. And that spot on U.S. Highway 50 outside Lake in Kansas where I first spied those Santa Fe Trail ruts, a permanent etching of national restlessness that I still feel stirring inside. The columnist George F. Will once wrote that there are 3 essential American landscapes: the Virginia Piedmont, the skyline of Manhattan, and the canyons of Utah. For wall calendars and screensavers, they can't be beat, but America may be seen in its best form among less celebrated vistas, the geographies that we don't stop to notice. This book is a collection of essays that attempts to paint a picture of American place in this uncertain era of political toxin and economic rearrangement. There are observations collected from 30 years of traveling through the United States and topics of more recent reporting. I had hopes that the where-ness of America might be perceived through its territorial shards and fragments: courthouses, mountains, farms, casinos, holy sites, movie sets, newsrooms, deserts, offices, amusement parks, living rooms, jails, swamps, retail stores, laboratories, police stations, bars, hotels, military bases, beaches, city halls, slums, libraries, mines, crime scenes, and the edge of Massachusetts Bay, where hungry English settlers first made contact with the original inhabitants of a nation that would become, in the words of the journalist John Gunther, the greatest, craziest, most dangerous, least stable, most spectacular, least grown up, and most powerful and magnificent nation ever known, and one that defies all attempts to define it in neat terms or easy descriptions, its immensity more detailed and chasmic than 100 encyclopedias could capture. While walking the Santa Fe Trail, I did not so much depend on the kindness of my fellow citizens as I was overwhelmed by it. Hundreds of people offered me rides that I couldn't accept. Many others let me sleep in their yards or gave me a spare bedroom for the night. One of them was Wayne Flory, a barrel-chested farmer who wore dark suits and was a lifetime member of the Old German Baptist Brethren, a pacifist church that largely shunned the vanities of the world. He showed me the spring once used by 19th-century wagon teams, which his church now used to initiate new members. Plenty of water for baptizing, he told me. While Anabaptist sects can be insular, Wayne was unapologetic about looking beyond his own land. He had visited Israel and kept a light airplane out in the barn in order to see the plains from above. He supported other Christian organizations whose doctrines were different than his, and he told me his nightly prayer, which was the essence of syncretic simplicity: God, I love you and I trust you. Wayne had known this Kansas acreage all his life. He had been born on it in 1924, a Tolstoy living on his own Yasnaya Polyana behind a tidy square of fence. It was the kind of house and wheat field I might have whizzed past on the highway without a second glance. Yet here was one man's intimacy with the earth that most post-farm Americans could scarcely comprehend. I walked away down the road early the next morning, heading toward Little Wakarusa Creek, and when afternoon came, bringing with it a dazzling show of clouds and sun, a rise in the road looking west made me think of all that unknown earth, all those farms and fields, all those cities, all those people existing all at the same time, intriguing, thoughtful, angry, charismatic, doubtful people I would never ever know, and all living on a fertile portion of the North American Platte under a rough 4-page agreement called the Constitution. It brought with it a sense of wonder and fear at the size of this land and questions about who we are that remain unanswered. This book is a part of that ongoing question. Mormon Historical Sites at Night. And it came to pass in those days, in those earlier peregrinations across the width of the continent, that I would find myself standing at strange hours, locked outside the gates of a spot that was linked by blood or prophecy to the early years of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, known by all as Mormons. Why I came to these places, I don't know. I'm not a Mormon. I don't think I would ever become one. The origin story of the church is just too full of leaks, their hierarchy so rigid, their testimonies in ward houses so canned, and the whole improbable enterprise too slathered in the telltale syrup of public relations. And yet I can't stay away. Here is the brief version of how they got started, which also happens to be a tremendously good story. In 1824, in the town of Palmyra, New York, a poor farmer's son named Joseph Smith, Jr., started telling his neighbors he was led by an angel to the top of a hill 8 miles south of his farm, where he dug up a book made of pure gold. Chiseled on the pages was the story of a lost tribe of Israel who had sailed to the Americas and been preached to by the resurrected Jesus Christ. Smith translated these runes by gazing at them through a magic stone from the bottom of his hat. The resulting document was the Book of Mormon, printed at the expense of a neighbor. The golden plates were then lifted up to heaven, having been viewed in the physical sense only by Smith himself. He was lynched in Illinois, but not before he had built a church whose strongest and best-known branch would go on to settle the difficulty of what is now Utah. Today, the church counts more than 15 million adherents worldwide. Their presence is particularly strong in the Mountain Time Zone. I grew up with Mormon friends in Arizona, and in my late 20s, I lived barely 1,000 yards from the church's world headquarters in Salt Lake City, with a view of the temple spires from my window. One of the most commonplace observations made about Mormons is the particular American quality of the religion, the optimism, the inventiveness, the faith in the common person, the urge for perfection and progress. Even Leo Tolstoy said this after meeting one of their missionaries on a Russian train. The Mormons do not consider humanity to be inherently sinful. Hell has no real place in their faith. Heaven will be open to just about everybody, and it is a folk saying among Mormons that if you were allowed a momentary glimpse of the lowest layer of heaven, the place where all the average criminals and atheists go, you would immediately shoot yourself in the head to get there. Joseph Smith's theology was a quilt work of the various ideas he picked up in the course of his brief life, threads of the Bible, the Constitution, Native American myths, and the Masonic temple rituals all sewn inside. But his deepest and most surprising principle was one of eternal progression. Every person's soul is on a journey from a vaporous state called the pre-existence into this world of flesh and onward into an indescribable future as a godlike being. Men and women together have the power to draw souls out of the pre-existence through having sex, which brings them inexpressible blessings in the hereafter, the physical pleasure of the act being only a foretaste, a shadow of the great unity to come. That this marvelously good story, which turned into a religious empire, sprang from American ground makes it all the more intriguing. Here was a system whose foundational dramas had been staged not just in the reliquaries of the Middle East, but on the blameless prairies of the New Country, within ready access and plainly marked on an ordinary road map of the kinds that used to be given out at gas stations. I feel in my bones that it is a deception, and that the tall tale of the golden plates is a grotesquerie at the heart of its sunny exterior of Mormonism, and yet I am drawn to its native geography again and again. And so it came to pass that after heading home from a party with some law students near the town of Sharon, Vermont on a December night in 2008, that I came to be standing by myself outside the perimeter of the birthplace of Joseph Smith. Again, this was mostly an impulse. The highway sign had beckoned Joseph Smith birthplace 2 miles and an arrow, so I bore left and went up from the White River Valley on the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?